My name is Robert Grigsby Wilson. I am a film editor, and I got there uh, by finding that I really enjoyed the process of putting the story together in the cutting room, and also watching other people not like putting the process together in the cutting room, and realizing that I had some sort of good mixture of narrative taste and technical ability, and figuring out that I could kind of carve out a little niche for myself. And also, it's, particularly lucky right now because there aren't a lot of, it's hard to shoot right now, but it's not hard to edit.
And how do you feel about the statement that an editor has to have a feel for the right cut, that it's more like talent rather than something that you can learn? And I think that there's like a push and pull to it, but what do you think is more important?
Well, I think it starts off with a certain rhythm and energy that like you can kind of feel. I think that there is like an instinct, and that instinct can be honed. I don't know that it is purely based on instinct. It's not something you go into blind. Also, it's something you go into requiring like you have to have a technical knowledge of like how to achieve the thing you see in your head. So that requires skill. So that requires practice. Also, I think there are other things that come into play. Like, I think it's really valuable to be a musician. I think it's really valuable to have tried other kinds of disciplines. I think that there's also like a certain philosophy that you can hone. Well, just to pick out an example, like if you read In the Blink of an Eye, right? Walter Murch talks about blinking, and how like every time someone blinks, it's like a thought. And that's something that like you can see. And the more you think about it, you can internalize it, and it becomes something you can see in your footage, and something you can see in performance, and something you can translate. And then you start to develop an instinct for it. The instinct can develop out of a lot of things, which is like how you come to the profession, how you come to the discipline. I don't know that I necessarily disagree that there isn't an instinct that you start out with, but I think that it really takes time and practice to see that, and that is probably more a skill. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. What is one of the first things that you've ever edited, or the first thing that you thought, oh, this is what I want to effing do? Like, why would I do anything else?
This is just going to seem convenient, but it's really true. It started out in my intro to media production class at Emerson, which is I was paired up with somebody. This is true. But it wasn't until I started with my intro to media production class that I was paired up with a friend of mine who was in the class too, who sat down and like started to edit this footage that we were supposed to do together, and he like hated it. He was so like, he was just like, oh my God, this is so boring. And I was like, how can you think this is boring? Like, we're literally making the movie right now. Like, this is so much fun. And he was just like, when I got to LA, I tried doing a lot of different PA jobs, and I always remembered that. And then I took my PA experience, and I saw an opening for a office PA at a trailer house, and cutting facility that cuts movie trailers. And I was like, that's cool. I need a job. So I applied to that job. They hired me. And and then that was sort of the start of my work in post.
What is something that it could be recent that's like the thing that you're most proud of?
I think the thing that I'm probably most proud of is cutting the 40-year-old version, which came out this year and is sort of in the mix for awards season, and was just nominated for an Indie Spirit Award. I have a certain amount of music video experience, so it felt like really bringing together a lot of skills that I had developed in different times, different places, and then they all kind of came together for that. I think I was proud of it, before we got into Sundance, when we got into Sundance, and then the fact that like out of Sundance, it's been widely heralded and like gotten an incredible response and sold to Netflix and all that stuff that I like totally would not think that, like, I was just like hoping we got into Sundance. You know what I mean? Like, that was like my expectation. Like, I'm just going to do a good job and I hope it gets in. The best answer. Yeah.
That's really That's so impressive. I think that's super. I think it is. It's pretty.
Thank you.
Sundance? Are
Thank
you
you.
kidding me? And then Netflix?
I mean,
God.
it was incredible. It's crazy. Yeah.
You spoke about how, it helps to be a musician sometimes, or, just practice. And I think that has to do with, timing again. And I was wondering if you could speak to, like cutting on a beat, or if there's a beat, or if you should cut on a beat.
I try to structure all my cuts visually as much as possible. Or if I'm listening to any sound as I'm cutting my scenes initially, I'm listening to the rhythm and energy of the dialogue. Like I'll even cut montages and sequences like that are going to be laid to music, even in the script laid to music. I never cut them with the music in the sequence first. I always cut the picture first. Then I will cut in the music. And then I'll look at it. But what will come from that is you will find the ways that the music will or won't line up in these series of happy accidents. There's a certain release that comes from the tension around not cutting on the beat. And I think that goes back to, the idea of like always subverting what the audience expects. That I think if you can fall into a rhythm where you're cutting on every quarter note, or you're cutting on every beat, and sure, it feels good for a couple minutes, but after a while it just becomes every shot's the same length, everything just kind of feels the same.
I'm wondering, do you think that there's a connection between editors and animators?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a huge relationship when you're talking about animated film, animated storytelling, because you can invent and then reinvent again the story through the process of editing the film, let's say. That requires a collaboration between the animation team and the editorial team and the director to let you keep finding the best version of the film. I mean, I really think that's why, Pixar can just constantly churn out incredible work, because they put such time and energy into story development and consideration, not just of how good it looks, right, but the how good the story is.
That brings me into my next question. So you talked about how the director would talk to the animator. So could you talk about how much freedom the editor has going into editing? Because, usually, I don't know if you've ever worked in a production like this, it might have been hell. The director isn't standing over your shoulder no, don't cut there.
The best relationship is somebody who will look at you as sort of the first audience and say okay, well, Rob wasn't on set, doesn't understand how hard we worked to make the shot work, doesn't understand how many hours I spent trying to cast this character, doesn't know anything, and all he's doing is looking at it and being yeah, it doesn't work. That doesn't always mean that I'm correct. You also have to have a certain humility to that. The one thing I do not want is for me to be sitting in the audience and watching my director on stage at a Q&A, and the person grabs the microphone and says hey, why'd you do it like that? And he's well, because Rob told me that it should be, I don't want to, that's not the kind of relationship that I want to, or I don't want to leave my imprint on the film to that degree where the director isn't happy with it.
Can you talk about some of the rules that you might have having to do with, timing, the feel of the cut, how long a cut should stay there that expresses different emotions?
Well, I think that that's a good question. And I think to some degree, every answer is different in the moment. And I think that I can, every rule is applied in different ways. And sometimes how you do or don't apply the rule is the point, right? I think that it's important to start from a base understanding of the way an audience expects something to feel, right? I think the 180 degree, let's just use the 180 degree rule for an example, right? Very, very famous film school 101 kind of thought, right? You want to stay on one side of the characters, right? If you want to be, if you're shooting over your one character's left shoulder, you want to be shooting over the other character's right shoulder. And so the orientation to them always works. Now, I sort of break that out to be you can break that rule as long as the audience doesn't lose the relationship to the characters in the space. You can jump the line, but if you cut wide and reveal the space more, you can jump the line, but as long as you can kind of still see where they are in relationship to each other and where they are in the space. I also think that you don't necessarily need to cut to a character every time they walk in the room or every time you hear something. Like sometimes it's more dramatic to see a character's reaction to something happening than to reveal the thing that they're seeing. And I think if you're cutting for emotion first, then that is always going to guide you in the right direction. And this extends to even like camera moves and lighting, and like if it's the best performance, if it's the right reason to be with a character, or it's the right like take, because it's giving us the right emotion from the character, like you got to have that. That's the most important thing to hold your thought onto.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to be an editor?
I think it's important to edit as much as possible. Edit whatever you can. Don't think because you don't want to work in hour-long narrative episodic television that you can't take a job cutting music videos or cutting commercials or cutting a feature film or anything like that, because every opportunity I've ever gotten has always utilized skills I learned doing other things. So like I said, like I started in movie trailers, right? There's always some of the skills of like cutting something down and like finding the quickest way to tell a story, and an interesting way to tell the story based on a whole mess of footage. I learned from cutting trailers. Now, I pretty quickly in that job realized I never wanted to cut trailers, so I left that opportunity pretty early on. However, that doesn't mean that I didn't learn a lot, and like give everyone's ideas as much time as necessary and make everybody feel heard, and then also figure out how to tell them their idea is not good, all those things. So like the being able to socialize in those internal dynamics in the cutting room, it's 50% of the job, I would say. I say editing is 50% technical, 50% therapy.
I agree. I think it's great. I agree with everything you're saying. Awesome.
Cool.
Stuff. Okay.
Good. You're on the right track, I hope. Or we're both on the wrong track together.
Or yeah, well, we'll figure it out then.
We'll figure it out.